There's something about Italy that just makes it feel like it should be home to the Mafia. It feels right. But how did they get their start? How did the Italian Mafia start? Well, to understand the origins of the Mafia, you have to go back to the very beginnings of Italy itself, when the country was nothing but warring factions of small Italian states. In fact, this is important because this period of time will be crucial to understanding how the Mafia actually became a thing. And as it turns out, it all started with one man named Matteo. Matteo was born in 1794 in a town called San Fratello in the Kingdom of Sicily. However, what is most interesting about him is that he would end up being the first member of a new type of criminal group known as the Mafia. So how did this happen? Well, back then, Sicily had just come under the rule of the Kingdom of Naples, but many Sicilians were unhappy with the change. You see, until the French Revolution, Sicily had been ruled over by Spain. But after the revolution, Napoleon decided to take over Naples and establish it as a kingdom, which meant that Sicily also came under the control of the House of Bourbon, the same royal family who ruled over Naples. However, the people of Sicily didn't particularly like this idea. They felt that their culture, language, and traditions were more closely related to the rest of Italy rather than to Spain. But even though they may not have liked the king, they also weren't particularly keen on living under Spanish rule either. This made them extremely susceptible to outside forces, especially considering the instability brought upon by the French Revolution. This resulted in an atmosphere of chaos and corruption, which led to a demand for law and order, as well as an opportunity for people like Matteo to rise through the ranks. So at the age of 23, Matteo left his hometown to seek his fortune in Palermo, where he ended up joining a gang that specialized in stealing from aristocratic landowners. They were commonly known as the Black Hand Society, and this was the beginning of Matteo's criminal career. You see, at the time, Sicily was a feudal society with deep-rooted inequality and oppression. There was a massive gap between the wealthy landowners and the poor peasants. This created a lot of resentment among the lower classes, which the Black Hand Society knew they could manipulate. Now, while the gang mostly focused on robbing the rich, they were still considered dangerous outlaws. And as such, they had to defend themselves against the authorities and rival gangs. Enter Mattioli, who quickly rose through the ranks thanks to his skills as a strategist. He was able to help the gang grow significantly, becoming a formidable force in the criminal underworld. Now, when you're running an illegal organization, having members constantly thrown in jail isn't exactly ideal. So the gang needed a way to protect themselves and make sure nobody messed with them. That's when Matteo came up with the idea of adopting the title of Mafia. The word Mafia doesn't have a clear origin, but there are a few theories about where it came from. Some believe that it comes from the Arabic word mafia, meaning honor or protection. Others say it comes from the Sicilian phrase amafiuco, meaning the one who kills, or even the Latin word mofie, meaning bad. Regardless of its exact origin, the adoption of this title symbolized their commitment to each other, signifying that they were not just a gang, but a true brotherhood. And this loyalty had real-world consequences. See, by calling themselves the Mafia, it gave them a certain level of power and respect. The locals knew not to mess with them, and rival gangs thought twice before trying to take them on. It was essentially a form of organized crime that enforced its own laws and protected its own, and if anyone tried to cross them, they would face the consequences. Fast forward a few years, and things got really bad. The government was corrupt and ineffective, and criminals like Matteo were thriving. In response, the government took extreme measures to try and stop the Mafia. They established special police forces to crack down on their activities and enforce order. For example, in 1860, an Italian nationalist named Joseph Garibaldi led a group of soldiers known as the 1,000 to invade Sicily. Their goal was to defeat the Bourbon army and establish a unified Italian state. Of course, this was met with resistance from the local population, especially from the Mafia, who were loyal to the Bourbon king. However, despite their efforts, the nationalists were victorious, and Sicily became part of the Kingdom of Italy. But this wasn't the end of the Mafia. In fact, it was just the beginning. You see, while the nationalists had defeated the Bourbon army, they were unable to restore order to the islands. The Mafia continued to thrive, and in some cases, they even aligned themselves with the new government to further their own interests. Now, This might sound confusing, but it's actually pretty common for criminal organizations to work with the government. You see, when governments are corrupt or weak, criminals often fill the void and provide services that the government is supposed to provide, like protection. By working with the government, the Mafia was able to legitimize their activities and become even more powerful. For example, in the early 1900s, the Mafia began to control much of Sicily's lucrative citrus fruit industry. They used violence and intimidation to maintain their dominance. But they were able to generate huge profits that they used to fund other criminal activities. In fact, by the mid-20th century, the Mafia had become so powerful that they were involved in almost every aspect of Sicilian life. They controlled the economy, the government, and even the police force. In response to this, the Italian government took action. They sent in troops to crack down on the Mafia, but it was largely unsuccessful. The Mafia was deeply ingrained in society and had too much power to be easily defeated. In fact, the crackdown only made things worse. The Mafia became even more violent and secretive, and they began to operate in other parts of Italy and around the world. And that brings us to today. The Mafia is still active in Italy and around the world. They've evolved and adapted to the times, but their core values remain the same. They're a criminal organization that uses violence and intimidation to achieve their goals, and they'll do whatever it takes to protect their own. From their humble beginnings as a gang of outlaws to their current status as a global criminal network. The Mafia's story is a reminder of the power of loyalty, the dangers of corruption, and the importance of fighting for justice. But now it's time to ask you, what do you think is the most interesting thing about the Mafia? Do you find their story fascinating or terrifying? Let us know in the comments below. And hey, if you're still hungry for more, why not check out some of our other videos? We've got plenty of content that's sure to leave you wanting more. So click away and don't be late. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.